Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of Titletown Talk. I'm your host, Ian Ewing. Ooh, am I excited for this one. I'm finally doing the free agency preview here today. A lot of you have been asking me about this, and I'm excited to do it. We're going to go into depth on the positions of need that the Packers have. Who are some of the names that they might pursue? And then first, we're going to actually look at their own free agents. Are there any free agents that they have that they're going to sign back? We're going to go into, what do the Packers actually look for in free agents? Will they stick to those trends this year? Will they go outside of it in the spirit of winning a Super Bowl? We'll talk about all of that and more on today's episode. But before we do that, let's talk about the Super Bowl that was. Wow, that was a fun Super Bowl. I think I said on this episode that I was pretty convinced the Chiefs were going to win it. And, I said it to anyone who would listen, the Eagles were the better team. But my God, did they kick the hell out of the Chiefs in that game. My goodness. Obviously, the big takeaway was that they really showed, how important it is to get pressure with 4 on defense. Patrick Mahomes was under absolute siege the entire game. I mean, my God, that was just unbelievable. I mean, they had Jalix Hunt, who was a rookie third-round pick, getting pressure on Pat Mahomes. They had second, third stringers getting pressure. They just had absolutely wore out that Chiefs offensive line. And I was told by a lot of smart people that their offensive line would stymie the Eagles' defensive line, and they wouldn't come near Pat Mahomes, said some people on ESPN and other networks. So much for that. Really big takeaway, too, was just the fact that Jalen Hurts played really, really, really well. The Chiefs completely stuffed Saquon. And I kind of went into it saying, if the Chiefs could stop Saquon Barkley, I would do that, make Jalen Hurts beat them from the pocket, make him beat him with his legs. And boy, did he. Jalen Hurts played really, really well. Obviously, he ended up being named MVP. I just want to use the Eagles as an example for all of you as we set up the Packers offseason ahead here. Some of you may remember the Eagles lost 5 of their last 6 games last year. I believe they were 10-1, and they ended up finishing 11-6. And then they got their butts kicked against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the first round of the playoffs. Everyone went into this season, myself included, pretty skeptical of the Eagles. But I want to remind everybody that they proved that no matter how you finished, a great offseason can completely turn everything around. And they absolutely nailed their offseason last year. Zach Bond, they picked up a guy who was playing out of position for them. Some of you might remember Zach Bond from the Badgers. I certainly do. He was an edge rusher for the Saints. He was not a middle linebacker, not even a serviceable one. He didn't even play there. Saquon, cast off the Giants. I think a lot of people, myself included, thought Saquon would be really good, but I didn't think he would be, 2,000 yards good. They pushed every button correctly in the offseason. They were aggressive. They killed it in the draft. I mean, Quinyon Mitchell was a great pick. Cooper DeJean, great pick. They had a lot of things that went their way. And really, you could say, the Lions probably could have been more competitive with them than the Commanders. I would agree with that. But sometimes it's all about that. We talked about this on the second episode of Titletown Talk, right? The best team doesn't always win every year, but this year I think they did. So anyway, we're going to use the Eagles as a jump-off point to talk about our offseason. The Eagles finished terribly last year. They were cast aside. Nobody thought they were going to be any good this year, again, myself included. And they went and absolutely blew the doors off of the league. So we're going to use that as a jump-off point. Before we do, though, Aaron Rodgers news. The Jets decided to part ways with him. I think that was pretty obvious, not very surprising. I mentioned it on one of my episodes here that I would be surprised if the Jets would retain him. All things considered, I think that it went as planned. Aaron Glenn, the new coach, he wanted to, set the team up in his vision. He didn't want to have to worry about Rodgers' personality. I think it's pretty obvious that they're not going to win this year. So why bring a quarterback in that wants to win a Super Bowl this year, right? He probably has 1 or 2 years left. So again, not super surprising that he moved or that they moved on without him. Where will he play is a big question. I think personally, the Vegas odds, they have him going to the Steelers. I think that's a pretty good idea for him. I think a sneaky spot would be the Colts. The Colts have a really, really fun roster. I'm not sure if any of you have looked at that. I love their receivers. They have a great offensive line. They have Jonathan Taylor. The Colts are a sneaky spot. Some would say Anthony Richardson needs another year or two of grooming. So I think there's a decent potential that he could go to the Colts. Ultimately, the Steelers make the most sense. I do think he's going to go wherever Sam Darnold doesn't go. Whoever doesn't get Darnold is probably going to look at Rodgers next, I would say. I don't really like any of the other free agent quarterbacks. I'm not a fan of Justin Fields. I think Justin Fields absolutely sucks. And I'm sorry if there's any Justin Fields fans listening to this, but my God, talk about a player who has never earned half of the praise he's gotten. I mean, my God. I watched Sam Munson and Steve Palazzolo. They're formerly of PFF. They work for the 33rd team now. They were talking about how, Justin Fields has all this like untapped potential. I'm just like, dude, we've seen it. The dude's not good. He doesn't know what he's looking at. He's scared to throw. Super inaccurate, really sloppy, right? So I think Sam Darnold's going to be the go-to guy in free agency for anyone who's looking for a veteran. Rodgers will be the next guy. Now, really scary one quick before we move forward. There's a decent chance he could end up with the Vikings, and that's a scary proposition, right? Obviously, the poetry is just off the charts, right? I mean, going to the Vikings just like Favre did, I mean, my God, that would just be hilarious, right? But, Justin Jefferson, Aaron Jones, TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison. What if he got Davante to join too? I mean, my God, that would be terrifying. Terrifying. I think ultimately they'll probably sign they'll probably go with J.J. McCarthy, but, you could see them starting him for 1 or 2 years and letting McCarthy sort of, sit behind him and learn, just like they did with Jordan Love. I think the Packers have proven that that's a winning formula, right? Obviously, I hope that doesn't happen. Let's just pray that does not happen. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about the Packers free agents and who they're going to re-sign. Before we do, though, let's talk about Jair Alexander. I think there's a very, very small chance that he could stay with the Packers, right? What they do with him is going to have an impact on what they do in free agency, because if they cut him or trade him, there's a decent amount of money that they will save. I believe it's $7 million this year. If they post June 1st him, I believe it's $16 million. Either way, I don't want Jair to go. I want to be clear about that. If they were to work out an extension with him or they rework his deal or something, I actually think that's the best thing for both parties. I think he's a great fit in Hafley's defense. I think he makes a ton of sense here. I've always been a big fan of his. I think he's a really weird dude. But I think he is as good as gone, personally. You heard Goody kind of bring up all the cornerbacks except him in the postseason press conference. Literally mentioned every corner except Jair. And then I think he caught himself at the end saying, and of course Jair. So I just don't see a world where he comes back, just personally. They always say the best ability is availability. And as we know, he's not been on the field near enough. He's played 14 games the last 2 seasons. He played all of 2022, and he was a second-team All-Pro, by the way. But he basically missed the entire season in 21 with that shoulder injury. He came back late against the 49ers in the playoffs. I believe he played in the dime package in that game. But ever since that shoulder injury, guys, if you look, he is not a good tackler anymore. He is literally afraid to play the run. So I think there is a 0.01% chance that he's back. Although, like I said, I really would love it if they worked it out with him. And I really shouldn't put it at 0.01. I put it like 10% chance that Jair's back. And I put it at 10. I don't know if anybody saw this. This is why I do this podcast, because I'm a nerd. I see all this stuff. The Packers social media team wished him happy birthday. And he said something like, let's run it back or run it or whatever. He, basically made it sound like he was still part of the team and he was excited for the season, sort of alluding to it. I mean, if it were me and I knew I was gone, right, I probably wouldn't be commenting on my birthday post, like alluding to being happy with Green Bay or the fact that they wished me happy birthday. But anyway, he really hasn't played to his contract since the 2020 season. And that season, he was a top 3 corner in the league, in my opinion. Since then, he's been, I would say slightly above average. But again, Goody said this in the press conference. They're looking at all options, and he wouldn't commit to the fact that he would be back. And then some of you might remember at the end of the season, the reporters asked him in the locker room, hey, do you want to do an interview? He said, well, I have nothing positive to say. You don't need to talk to me. I don't even know if I'll be here next season. That was his exact quote. So, yeah, I think he's gone. So, anyway, I think they're going to try to trade him first. I don't know who's going to trade a high pick for him, especially knowing that they're probably going to release him. The only reason a team would trade for him is to sort of keep the bidding war from happening, because I do think there's going to be a ton of interest if he's cut. So I could see maybe a 6th, 7th round pick coming in. I've seen a lot of people, nobody like in my Facebook feed, but just like social media in general, saying like, oh yeah, they should get a 3rd round pick for him. I'm like, no, dude, nobody's paying that. No way in hell. I saw a couple people say like, oh, they'll trade Jair in a 1st for Myles Garrett. I'm like, dude, that is not happening. No one sees Jair that way. Okay. So anyway, I think Jair is gone, and that's the perfect jump off point for this discussion. Let's talk about the notable free agents for the Packers. I'm not going to go into the restricted free agents. I don't want to go into that. I don't actually really I don't remember the last time they didn't bring back a restricted free agent. Those of you that don't know what the restricted free agents are, it means the Packers have all the rights to them, and they can basically designate a contract to them. I don't know the exact verbiage there, but they're not real free agents is my point. We have Josh Myers, Brandon McManus, Isaiah McDuffie, TJ Slayton, Eric Stokes, and A.J. Dillon. Now, we'll get into those players in a second, who I think they'll bring back and whatnot. Before we talk about it, the only person that I think that they just cannot let go of in this situation is Brandon McManus, the kicker. I think that that's remarkable. Just seeing as basically the entire team is going to be back in 2025. If all 6 of these players walked, we would still be just fine next year. Okay? Before I continue, I'll lead with that. That being said, I would love it if they re-sign Brandon McManus. I believe they will. But again, I'd be shocked if they weren't still great regardless of these players. Let's talk about Josh Myers first. In 2024, his PFF grade was 55.3. Remember, okay, before I continue, guys, PFF, I'm going to use their grades in this episode quite a bit. I realize PFF isn't perfect, but I really like PFF. They do a really, really good job of giving you a baseline, and I think typically they pass the eye test. A lot of people disagree with the way they grade quarterbacking. I actually really like it a lot. We're not going to get into it right now, but we're going to use PFF grades a lot today, specifically with pressure percentage and stuff like that. Like I said earlier in another episode, I don't pretend to be an offensive lineman expert, right? I try to defer to people who know more than me in that area, right? I'll pick Andy Herman again from Pack a Day Podcast. He always writes for Packers Report as well. He does his own grades. Josh Myers is never graded even average, let alone above average for him. I don't see any world where Josh Myers comes back. And Goody was asked about it at the end of the season, and there's something he says whenever guys aren't going to be back. He said this with John Runyon last year. He said it with other people. We want all of our guys back. Give them a compliment and then move on. Right? It's the same playbook for every player that's ever left in free agency for the Packers, every single time. I mentioned this in another episode too. The offensive line next year is going to be Rasheed Walker, Jordan Morgan, Elton Jenkins, Sean Ryan, and Zach Tom. I think this is addition by subtraction. They're going to be a better O-line in 2025 without him. Now, let me go by saying this. I actually think he's a good pass blocker, and the grades would reflect that. I think he only gave up like 2 sacks this year, right? But I think that that's a little misleading, and you can see it. There are some plays, guys, and again, I don't know much about offensive line play, right? Somebody listening to this might have a really, really good idea of it. He whiffs all the time. I will never forgive the Packers for drafting him over Creed Humphrey. Creed Humphrey is the Chiefs center, and he's amazing. They could have drafted Creed Humphrey, and they end up picking Josh Myers. I'm not going to let that. I'm not going to dig into that right now. This is the TJ Watt, Kevin King thing, right? I don't want to dig into that, right? I get why they picked Josh Myers, but ultimately it was a mistake. Whatever their configuration looks like on the offensive line next year, not having Josh Myers is a plus, in my opinion. So they're not going to re-sign Josh Myers. If they do, it will be a really team-friendly deal. And I think someone's going to pay him quite a bit of money. He's got the second-round pedigree, good pass blocker, smart guy, super athletic. Somebody's going to pay a lot of money for him, and it's not going to be the Packers. Okay. Eric Stokes is the next one. Boy, Eric Stokes, man. Oof. Showed a ton of promise that rookie season. Personally, I thought the Packers were on the verge of having an all-star tandem at corner, right? They had Jair and Stokes. Then 2022 came. So remember, he was a rookie in 21. Drafted him at 29, I believe. He ran that 4.29 40 in the draft, which fastest player since, I don't remember who it was, Chris Johnson, sorry. Dude was really fast, really athletic, long. That's what the Packers like. 6'1", good size. He played absolutely terrible in 2022 before he eventually got hurt in week 7. Missed a ton of time after that. Came back last season really late. Looked really, really rusty. He was basically given the job in training camp this year. And, he looked better than last season. He did look a little bit better late in the season because he really wasn't thrown at all. But his PFF grade was 61, which was just at average, placed him at 122 out of 223 eligible corners. So later in the season, he fell out of favor completely to Carrington Valentine, who I think took a really big step this year. I'm a big fan of Carrington Valentine. There is almost 0% chance that Stokes comes back unless it's like a vet minimum, right? So we can kiss Eric Stokes goodbye. He was a bust. And we're going to do an episode where we look at all the draft classes under Goody. In another episode, like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about Eric Stokes at that time. Brandon McManus. Okay, well, I'm not going to get into the scandals and the accusations and all that. I don't know anything about it. If he's guilty, is probably a scumbag, but I'm not going to get into that. He stabilized the kicker position, right? They went with Braden Arvison out of camp. They had Anders Carlson last year. Couple of disasters. Carlson was okay this year, actually, when he left the Packers, ironically. Braden Arvison was hitting all the gimmies at first. Then he started missing gimmies. Then they bring in Brandon McManus. He missed one kick in the regular season, had a ton of clutch kicks. He had that one against the Bears that should have won them the game, but didn't. Don't get me started on that. The big question around kicker is, will they draft a young kicker or not? I'm not sure that they're going to see it as a viable option after failing with Anders Carlson. I think they think McManus is their guy. Goody already said he wants McManus back. Again, I mentioned earlier when Goody wants somebody back, he says so. I think they'll address the long-term kicking situation next year, maybe the year after, but they're competing for a Super Bowl, man. They can't afford a shaky kicker situation, right? It cost them that 49ers game, in my opinion, in 23. Cost them a few games this year as well. I think they could have won 12 games this year had they just had a stable kicking situation at the beginning of the year. I think that a couple of games would have went it the other way if they had a more stable kicker. They probably would have won that Vikings game, right? Anyway, TJ Slayton, complicated. He was one of the best run-defending defensive linemen in the league this year. When he was on the field, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but he was so instrumental in their success against the run this year. When he was on the field, they averaged an entire yard less per carry than when he wasn't. Crazy. So I think it was 3.2 yards per carry they gave up when he was on the field, and then 4.4 when he was off, which is insane. So I think they're going to bring TJ back. I don't think he's going to command a lot of money, and they have the money to pay him, which we'll talk about. I just don't see them letting him walk. I also don't think TJ fits in just anywhere else. He's not a full-time player. He's a rotational guy, early down guy. He doesn't offer any pass rush. But the only way I could see him leaving is if somebody offered him just stupid money somewhere else. And I don't think Goody's going to play that game with him. They're probably going to offer him what they think he's worth. I don't think he's worth a large contract. He's a rotational D lineman. I think it'll be fine. They should bring him back. Okay, Isaiah McDuffie, solid run defender. That's about all he brings to the table, truthfully. He's a good special teamer, right? I just think alone, just taking his play last year alone away, the fact they drafted Tyron Hopper in the 3rd round, they clearly see him as the next guy up to be the 3rd linebacker. They're not going to bring Isaiah McDuffie back. Linebacker's a sneaky need. They're going to draft somebody. They're going to pick up somebody in free agency. Nobody big. Nobody Zach Bond level, right? But they'll pick up somebody that's going to help them at linebacker. But McDuffie, if he's back, will be special teamer. I don't see it personally. I think he's gone. A.J. Dillon. Man, some people are going to be pissed when I say this. I know he's a fan favorite. I'm sure there's somebody listening to this podcast who really wishes that he was back. There is almost a 0% chance that he's back this year, guys. He's coming off of the stinger injury. Josh Jacobs is running back 1. They're similar running backs in general. I think Emmanuel Wilson is a guy. I don't think I think he's a really good running back. I think eventually Josh Jacobs is going to leave, probably within the next year or two. And when he does, Marshawn Lloyd, who will be the third running back this year, who I think is going to be special, he and Emmanuel Wilson are going to be the running backs for the long run. I'm not even mentioning Chris Brooks, who I think has a ton of talent. He contributed a lot in 24. There's no way A.J. Dillon's going to want to come back as RB4. In fact, even if he wanted to, his agent's going to be like, bro, you need to get the hell out of here. So anyway, the only so A.J. Dillon will not be back. Sorry to disappoint anybody. I love A.J. Dillon, but he ain't coming back. Okay, so to recap, the only 2 free agents that I would bring back are Brandon McManus and TJ Slayton. That's how it should be. I think McManus is the obvious need. They need to bring him back. I think TJ Slayton is replaceable. However, I think he will be a good enough salary that you bring him back. Now, let's talk about the free agent market, what everybody's been waiting for. As far as cap space, they have about $36 million in free cap space, not including cutting Jair. Jair gives them about $7 million to play with, and a little bit more if they post June 1st him. So their effective cap space, again, not including Jair, is closer to $25 million. The effective cap space is basically just like the in-season piggy bank. Ken Ingalls, if you guys haven't followed him, he's on Twitter. He's the cap guy for the Packers. He analyzes the cap. I love his content. He does a great job. So $25 million, that is way more than enough money to make a couple of significant moves. Now, here's the crazy part. They can free up another $74 million on the cap if they do all the possible restructures. So that means that a restructure is they basically convert the cap number to a signing bonus. So that means it comes off the cap this year and it's spread out over the remainder of the contract. So this is, in real terms, the salary cap equivalent to putting something on a credit card, right? This is what they did in 2020 to 2022 during the COVID season, when they went all in last time when Rodgers was here. Now, I don't expect them to do all $74 million, but if you guys start seeing news of restructures coming, you will know that they are ready to spend some freaking money. So we'll get actually a pretty good idea of how much money they want to spend, like as soon as they can start doing restructures. So again, I don't expect them to do that, but it will show you that they can sign anyone they want. If there's a guy they want, they have money to do it. Okay. Now, again, does that mean they will? Not necessarily. I don't think so, but they can. That brings me to Zach Tom. He's going to get an extension this year. This is the first year he's eligible. He will get one. He's going to get paid. And he's worth every penny. He's the only guy, though, that's eligible for an extension that's actually going to get one. I don't think they're going to extend Romeo Doubs or anybody else from that draft class, personally. Quay Walker's not going to get re-signed yet. So, guys, just so you know, I am very optimistic about what they're going to be able to do in the offseason this year. Let's talk about who it could be. So, before we do that, let's talk about what they've typically looked for in free agency to this point. So, under Goody, in 2018, that was his first year, they signed Jimmy Graham to a top-of-market tight end deal. He came off that 10 TD season with Seattle. Hated that pickup personally, but at the time I was actually happy about it, but ended up being a bad signing. But they spent a lot of money on Jimmy Graham, right? 2019, that was the big season. They signed Zarius Smith, Preston Smith, Adrian Amos, and Billy Turner. They spent a ton of money in 2019. And every one of those signings, even Billy Turner, guys, to be honest, I think they were worth it. Everybody on that list. 2024, Xavier McKinney and Josh Jacobs. Okay, now if you notice there's a couple of years missing there. The other years, they did a lot of re-signings. They re-signed Rasul Douglas. They re-signed Devondre Campbell, LOL. They did a couple other re-signings and extensions. They obviously had the Bakhtiari re-signing. They did the Jair extension. They extended Elton Jenkins. So they did a lot with their own guys. They did some smaller signings like Christian Kirksey, for example. But when they've actually gone and spent money in free agency, here are the things that have in common. It's usually second contract guys They're typically within like that 23 to 27 year age range, sometimes a little bit more than that. They like guys with a proven track record, so nobody who's a projection. And most importantly, Goody always says this, their best football is ahead of them, with quotes. So there are a few guys in the free agent market that match up to that. I will say, though, I don't think this free agent market is like great. It's not the best free agent market to have all the money that they do have. But that being said, I do think they might go outside of those norms a little bit because of the fact that they're propping open their Super Bowl window. Okay. Question 1. What positions do they need to upgrade? The following: cornerback, pass rusher, receiver. Again, linebacker, not a high signing. And then O-line depth. Before I continue, remember O-line depth. I think this is a sneaky possibility that they could actually spend some money here. Just so you guys know, last year, not a single person, myself included, thought that they were going to sign a running back in free agency. And then they signed Josh Jacobs. I think if they do a surprise signing this year, it's going to be at the offensive line position. There's a couple guys I really like. We'll talk a little bit about them today, but let's start with cornerback. Before we continue with free agents, this is the position where I think they're going to draft early. I think it's going to be corner or edge, pass rusher, edge, whatever you want to say, in the first round or second round. I think we're going to talk a lot about draft guys. Trey Amos is a guy I really like. There's a few other guys I really like that we'll talk about. Trey Amos is my favorite. My cousin, Laven, if you're listening to this, thanks, man. I got into his tape, and I'm obsessed with the dude. I think there's a good chance they would be interested in him. We'll get into draft a lot more as we get close, but let's talk about the possible free agents at cornerback. The first one we'll talk about is Charvarius Ward. He's on the 49ers last year. Down season last year, but in 2023, he was a second-team All-Pro. So projection or productivity is there for him, right? He's a second contract guy. He's only 27. In 2024, he had a huge family tragedy that I don't really want to talk about on the podcast. I don't know enough about it personally, but anybody who has any credibility in analyzing the situation all said that this had a major impact on him. Evidently, at some interview, he said that he can't even be in San Francisco anymore because of this. So he will not be going back to the 49ers. So he will be available. If we get the 2023 version, he is a steal. And he is an absolute, no doubt, no-brainer. He's got the size Green Bay likes. He's got the speed. He's a 4.4 guy. But the 2024 version was just not good enough. Now, this is familiar, right? This is exactly what happened with Josh Jacobs. 2022, Josh Jacobs was a first-team All-Pro. He led the league in rushing. Okay? 2023, he was very much a different running back. So Goody, when he signed Josh Jacobs, looked at 2022 and said, okay, that's who he really is. 2023 was contract disputes. He missed a little bit of the offseason there. So I think Charvarius Ward is a sneaky possibility. The only thing that deters me a little bit with him is that the fact that he had a down year last year, but he has the size to look for, the speed. From agility testing, he's not great, but I think Charvarius Ward is a decent possibility. Another guy I think is a high possibility is Paulson Adebo. He was a guy that they brought in for a pre-draft visit in 2021. Yeah, 2021. He was hurt in 2024. He played for the Saints. He only played in 7 games. I think he played through that injury for a decent period of time in 24. He had 3 picks in 7 games, so there's some ball skills there. He's only 25 years old. And if we look back at his last full season in 23, he had a 78 PFF grade. He's a good man, zone guy. I really liked him coming out of the draft. Some of you guys who are nerds, he went to Stanford. In 2020, if he had come out, he would have been a first-round pick. But he decided to come out early. Sorry, I think I'm getting that mixed up. If he had come back to school in 2022, he would have been a higher draft pick. I might be getting that wrong. It doesn't matter. He was a really good draft possibility for them. I thought more of a second-round pick. But when they drafted Eric Stokes, they obviously had no interest in picking him later. I think Paulson Adebo, there's a good chance they're going to like him. He's probably the best free agent option if they want to go corner high in the draft. Now, if they pick up Charvarius Ward, they will not need to go corner high. And if I were Green Bay, I really like Charvarius Ward. And I think that if they picked him up, he would start on the outside with Carrington Valentine. I think Nixon and Bullard would play back and forth in the slot. I think that he's the guy. But if they want to go draft or corner in the draft in the first round, I think Adebo makes a lot of sense because Adebo is not someone who can pencil in as a starter for past this first 2 years. So I like the idea of Paulson Adebo. Rasul Douglas is another one that I think is a decent possibility. If you remember, the Packers signed him to a 3-year deal in 2022. They loved him a lot, and so did I. They only moved on from him in 2023 because the Bills offered a third-round pick for him. Remember that season, guys. They started out 3-6. Nobody thought they even had a prayer to make the playoffs. When you have a team offering you a top 100 pick for a cornerback that's probably not a long-term guy at that time, Goody was right to make that trade. But if you asked him now, he would tell you he wished he didn't trade him because they could have used Rasul this year and last year. There's a decent chance they could bring him back, but he had a 59 PFF grade this last year. He was not great this last year. I don't think it was from decline from what you can see in the tape, but I don't think he's necessarily the guy either. A few other options I like. Byron Murphy. He is actually the number one person who I would pick from this list, but I guarantee you the Vikings are going to re-sign him. So I think he's out of the question. DJ Reed, another guy. He's the Jets cornerback. Decent possibility there. I don't like that at all. I don't think the Packers will pick him up. He's too small. I don't think he has enough man skills to play in Hafley's defense either. Don't think DJ Reed's an option. Carlton Davis is another one. He was on the Lions this last year, but a bit injury plagued. He's a little bit older. Size isn't there either for him. Asante Samuel Jr., another guy. He was a pre-draft visit for the Packers, which we'll talk a lot about when we get closer to the draft. If somebody does a pre-draft visit with the Packers, they like him. So they did like Asante Samuel. I don't think they're going to pick him up, though. Horrible tackler. One of the worst tacklers I've ever seen. And it shows up. If you look at even if you look at highlights of him, he is not a good tackler. He's one of those guys who throws his body at their legs and just hopes for the best. He's not the guy. As of right now, their starters are Keyshawn Nixon, Carrington Valentine, and Javon Bullard will be in the slot. That's not going to be who we have going into this season. I think they're going to go high in the draft. So, again, my official prediction with corner, they're going to go corner in the first or second round. If they pick up Charvarius Ward, expect them to go corner 3rd to 7th round. If they get a guy like Paulson Adebo or even Rasul Douglas, I think they could go a little bit higher. So that's corner. Now, wide receiver is a really odd one, okay? So, Romeo Doubs didn't take a step back, or took a step back. We won't get into the whole receiver discussion. Even if you don't take into account all the people that either didn't take a step or took a step back in 2024, you got to remember Christian Watson's still not going to be back until maybe week 12. It could be longer. So they got to pick up a guy here. Obviously, the big name is T. Higgins. Okay? I would be surprised if they went with T. Higgins, but I do think they're going to be involved. He's only 25. He's been a high producer. He's a second contract guy, so he meets all the standards that Green Bay looks for. He's got great size. He wins contested catches. He's a good route runner, good hands. He's kind of the guy they need, in my opinion. They need a deep speed guy most, but the other thing they need is a guy who can just beat man coverage, okay? I think there's a decent possibility that Green Bay pulls this off. Again, if they want to outbid everybody, they can, and they will, right? I didn't know this until recently, but Jordan Love is friends with T. Higgins, so there's something there. I think Jordan could, potentially get him here. I actually think this is like a 25 to 30% chance of happening. I'm pretty pessimistic about wide receiver signings, but given his age, his productivity, he's never really been the number one guy, despite being really highly graded. I think he had an 82 receiving grade this year from PFF. His best football is ahead of him. So to quote Brian again, this is a guy who I think they're going to be really interested in him. The thing is money. I don't think Goody's going to go in a bidding war for this guy. I also don't know if you want to go into a bidding war for T. Higgins because I don't think he's a top guy. He's going to be paid like a top 5 wide receiver. He's not a top 5 wide receiver. He's a good receiver. I think he's a really good receiver. He'd be the number one guy on the Packers if they pick him up. But I don't think he's like a dude. I don't think he is Jamar Chase level. I don't think he is Justin Jefferson level, right? If you guys disagree, that's fine. I just don't see it. Having said that, I think they're going to be involved with T. Higgins. I would not be surprised if they were the sneaky team that ended up signing him, okay? Outside of T. Higgins, though, in free agency, guys, I don't really see a lot of options out there. You're going to laugh when I say this. I would entertain MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Deep speed guy. He's going to be super cheap. The reason that they would go this route is because they need to replace Watson's speed, okay? So it'll come down to the fact that they have to believe, in order for them to get MVS, they have to believe that they only need to replace Watson and his speed. If they want to do anything else, MVS is not the guy, right? I think they need a bucket getter, a guy who can get open on third down. To quote Peter Bukowski from Locked On Packers, a bucket getter. I think that's a great way to put it. Somebody who can win in man coverage, a go-to guy on third down who is going to be open, who might demand a double team here and there, right? That's not MVS, right? So if they think they need a speed guy, I like MVS as an option. He's cheap. Darius Slayton from the Giants, another guy who I like there for speed. Not a lot of production there, though. You'd get him really cheap. Now, as far as trade options go, DK Metcalf is out there. He's somebody who makes a lot of sense, right? The Seahawks have a lot of salary cap to shed. That's why I think there's a possibility they trade him. They also are going to want to build their offense around Jackson Smith and Jigba, who I absolutely love and who I wanted the Packers to draft instead of Lucas Van Ness. I digress. He would be a perfect replacement for Watson, and his salary's not bad. He's a guy who can beat man coverage. He's a deep threat, great size. More importantly, we know that Goody liked him. He just said in the press conference afterward that they had Debo, Metcalf, and Elton Jenkins all in the same spot, and they went with Elton Jenkins, which I think we are all okay with at this point. I am. It's going to come down to whether or not the Seahawks want to shed a salary. The Seahawks are not a Super Bowl contender. I think they might be competitive for that division, but I don't think they're going to make much noise. So I could see them shedding that. I think they want to build the offense around Kenneth Walker, Jackson Smith-Njigba. We'll see. Deebo Samuel's available. I think that's interesting. I think he'll be a fairly cheap trade, but he added a lot of bad weight this last offseason. He played really heavy this year. He did not look like the same guy. And he's really not who the Packers need. He's not a dynamic route runner. Man, I can't talk today. He's not a guy who can get deep behind safeties, right? He's kind of redundant with Jaden Reed there. So I don't see Debo being the guy. I wouldn't be upset if it was, especially if he lost a little bit of weight. No offense. Cooper Kupp is also available. Cooper Kupp is not going to happen. I had a friend ask me about this the other day. If you're listening to this podcast, I'm not going to name names. Cooper Kupp is not going to happen. I don't want it to happen. So that brings us to Davante Adams. Davante Adams. He's still under contract with the Jets. Sorry, guys. But he's not going to be there for long. Now that Rodgers isn't coming back, they owe him like $37 million. They're not going to pay that. There's a possibility that they could restructure it, but I doubt it. I think he wants to be a free agent, so they're going to cut him. He still gets open at a really, really high level. I think he's still a top 10 wide receiver in the game. He's the exact guy they need, in my opinion. Now, it's going to come down to money. Again, I said earlier, they need a bucket getter, somebody who can get open on third down. That's Davante. The key is cost, right? If he's costing over $20 million a year, I don't think that they should go that route. I do think that he's probably going to be more like 17 to 20, and I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Let's not forget about what happened when he left. Some of you might not know this, right? Goody and the Packers, they offered him more money than the Raiders did. But he picked the Raiders because he wanted to be closer to home. We know that story, blah, 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 blah. Wanted to play with Derek Carr, LOL. But he wanted the Packers to pay him before 2021. And the Packers wanted to see more before they did, okay? And I think it's because of the injuries in 2020. He had a couple of weird injuries in 2020. They wanted to see him do it again, and he did, right? And then they did eventually offer him a really, really expensive contract. They offered him more money than the Raiders. So I know that they were willing to bring him back. They had a plan. They had a scenario where Davante was back. They probably wouldn't have been able to re-sign Rasul Douglas and Devondre Campbell that year. But again, in retrospect, I think I would have rather had Davante, right? If I could pick any receiver in free agency, it would be Davante. I think there's a really decent chance that it happens. I know some of the beat guys, Jason Wilde, a guy who I respect a ton, thinks that there's a really good possibility. He thinks it's a 55 to 45% chance that he comes. I don't know if it's that high, but I mean, guys, if you want me to pick one guy, it's Davante. He makes so much sense. He can groom those receivers, get him on a 2-year deal, right? I think the next 2 years, when the Packers Super Bowl window is the widest open, decent chance. But wide receiver is going to be a draft pick. A couple of guys I really, really like. Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State. I hope I said his name right. I like him a lot. Great run blocker, gets open a lot. Jack Beck, something from TCU. I love this kid. Look him up. Jack Beach, however you say it. Awesome player. Jaden Higgins from Iowa State. Matthew Golden from Texas, I believe. Savion Williams from TCU. Those are all guys. If you want to see some guys that are Packers types who I think they're going to be interested in, there's your guys. Now let's talk about pass rusher. I know this is getting really long, guys. I hope you're enjoying this so far. Give it a like. Give it a subscribe if you are. Your boy might lose his voice on this one. This is the most loaded position in the entire draft, the defensive line. We'll talk about that in a second, but the edge options in free agency are aplenty, and so are pass rushers in general. They're at a premium in free agency. So if you were to ask me, hey, Ian, what do you think is the position that they'll address in free agency? It's going to be pass rush. I think there's a 95% chance that they pick up a pass rusher. Now, does that mean it's an interior offense or defensive lineman or an edge? It could be either, right? The first option I want to talk about is Khalil Mack. We talked about Khalil Mack and how the Packers wanted to trade for him. They almost did. They were down to the final 2 teams in 2018. He had a 92 PFF grade in 2024. That was his best season since 2018. Guys, he is still a really, really effective player. The Chargers aren't going to bring him back. I'd be shocked if they did. I think he makes a ton of sense. He doesn't have to be a full-time player here. I think he might play like 60% of the pass or 60% of the snaps. He brings a ton of pass rush production that they just did not get last year. I think that he makes the most sense. As long as the money's right, which I think he'll command under $20 million a year, get him on a 1 or 2 year deal. I think that makes the most sense. He's the one I would pick out of this group. Milton Williams from the Eagles. My God, he had a fun Super Bowl, right? He's only 25. He fits the age requirement. It's the second contract. He had 40 pressures in 2024. He had a 70 overall grade on PFF, a 90 graded pass rush grade, which is second in the NFL. And this is why he's so intriguing to me, because he can absolutely rush the passer from the interior. Put him next to Davante Wyatt for the next 4 or 5 seasons in the middle. Watch the hell out on third down, passing downs. My God. But the issue, 43 graded run stopper. That's bad. He's a rotational player. I don't think that is the route they're going to go because of that. The Eagles aren't going to re-sign him. They're going to pay Jalen Carter. They got other guys to pay. His deficiency against the run is what's going to make him, I would say, more unlikely for the Packers. But he is a guy I really like, and I would not be shocked if they bring him in, they entertain it. Ultimately, they already have Davante Wyatt, who's already kind of the pass rush specialist that's not great against the run. So if they were to get, let's just say Milton Williams and Davante Wyatt on the field at the same time, those teams are going to be able to run the ball with ease. So that's a bit scary. Another guy, Levi Nwuzurike from the Lions. Love him. Loved him in the draft. The Lions are not going to be able to afford to pay him because they paid Aleem McNeil. They have to pay the safety who's eluding me, Kirby Joseph. He's not going to get re-signed. Super athletic guy. He can play every down. He's not like Milton Williams, right? He can play the run pretty well and the pass. He's only 26, second contract guy, so again, meets those standards. Best footballs ahead of him. He had 45 pressures in 2024. So out of the 219 qualified players, he was 15th. 70 overall grade from PFF, 67 pass rush grade. He's definitely more well-rounded than Milton Williams, but I like Williams' ability to rush the passer a bit more. Decent possibility there. Levi Nwuzurike. And yes, that's how you say his name. Now, my second favorite guy, Josh Sweat from the Eagles. Balled out in the Super Bowl. Fantastic 2024. He's an ascending player, which is literally exactly what the Packers are looking for. He's 27, going to be 28 when the season starts. 54 pressures in 2024, which would have led the Packers. 75 overall grade. 71 pass rush grade, 69 run stopping, so well-rounded guy. The Eagles are not going to bring him back. Highly doubt it. But he's an every down edge player. If you put him aside from Rashawn Gary, that's a really, really good edge tandem. He just jumps off the tape, guys. If you watch the tape, the final 10 weeks of the season, he got better and better and better and better. He absolutely wrecked the game against the Packers, by the way. So if I had to bet on if Goody were to pick up a long-term guy, I think Josh Sweat is the guy. Now to my favorite one, and nobody's talking about this, but Chase Young, former Redskin football team commander. He played for the Saints last year. He played for the 49ers the year they went to the Super Bowl in 23. The year that he played for the 49ers, he played really, really well. He was pass rushing opposite of Joey Bosa. He was scary good. Former number 2 overall pick, so he's got the pedigree. He was on the brink of stardom until he got hurt in 22. Last year in 2024, 66 pressures, which would have been number 1 in the Packers by about 20. Run defense a little bit poorer, but again, he's not going to be a 100% snap guy. He's going to be playing passing downs. He's going to be rotational. He just didn't have a lot of sack production. I think he had 5 sacks last year, and that's going to drive his price down. I personally care a lot more about pressures than I do sacks, and so do the Packers, by the way, and so do all NFL teams. Having said that, I do think he's not going to get a lot of money. So he's an affordable guy. I would pick Chase Young in a heartbeat over everybody else in this list. I just don't see that from the Packers, but I think he's a realistic option. So Chase Young, last one for pass rush, Osa Odigizua. Yes, a real name. He is the defensive lineman from the Cowboys. He had 60 pressures last year. Dallas will not be able to afford to bring him back. I don't think he wants to go back there either, by the way. He's only 26 years old. Great pass rusher. He had an 82 overall pass rush grade in 23, 94 in 2024. My God, great pass rushing guy. He's pretty well-rounded compared to Milton Williams. He's probably my favorite of the interior guys. So you can see, guys, that's my list of defensive linemen. That's where the most meat is at in free agency. They're going to end up with one of these guys. Remember this. Mark it down. Book it. One of these guys will be a Packer. They're going to make a pass rush splash. There is a chance still, yes, that they could trade for Myles Garrett, possibly Max Crosby. I know Trey Hendrickson from the Bengals is on the market. I don't think they're going to move him, but anyway, I think that one of these guys I just named will be a Packer. Linebacker, depth move here. They're going to have to pick up a linebacker. They only have 3 guys under contract. They're not going to spend high draft capital on one of these guys unless they see like a, high-end talent guy, speed guy, whatever, athlete, freak show athlete. I'm really nervous about Tyron Hopper. I was watching the draft with my cousin. I was pretty shocked when they picked Tyron Hopper. He was a 5th to 6th rounder on the consensus board. And I think the consensus board, by the way, is the best way to determine value, whether or not somebody was a reach or not. I think that he's going to be anointed the starter next to Walker and Cooper, unless he totally messes it up, right? But I think they're going to need to sign a depth piece in free agency. I think they should bring back Eric Wilson potentially. I didn't put him on the list because I think he's gone, but I think they need another veteran guy there. Last but not least, offensive line. This is the big wild card position, guys. I think it's possible that they will spend big money on guard or center. Okay? I think the starters are locked in. I gave them earlier. I don't think, if you had to make me predict, I don't think that they will spend big money on the offensive line. But there are 2 guys I like, Trey Smith and Drew Dahlman. I think that, again, this could be like the Josh Jacobs signing last year. One that nobody saw coming, thought it was a position of strength. Then they just come out of nowhere and sign a big name. It's possible. But regardless, even if they don't go big name, they got to sign some depth here. Outside of the starters, they have Jacob Monk, who they drafted in the 6th round, I believe, last year. I like him. But the last 7 games, he was inactive, healthy scratch. So he clearly fell out of favor to my next guy on the list, Travis Glover, who I like. He was drafted as a tackle. He's massive, by the way. He ended up moving to guard. I think he's got a lot of potential, high ceiling. Kadeem Telfort ended up replacing him in the Eagles game. Massive guy. He's literally huge, guys. Like 6'8", 360 or something. Got a lot of upside there. But again, more of a depth guy. Sneaky name I like, Donovan Jennings. He was a guard last year, undrafted free agent. They spent a ton of money on him, by the way. They don't, as undrafted free agents, right? Everybody has an option to pick you up. So they kind of have to bid for them a little bit, and they did bid for Donovan Jennings. So a lot of offensive line people that know the game really like Donovan Jennings. I think he's going to actually make the team next year. But regardless, you guys can see I don't think they have enough depth there. So they're going to pick a day 2 or day 3 guy, probably at tackle that can play inside. So I think there's a decent chance that they're going to go that route. Final thoughts. I know this was really long, guys. I think the Packers are going to be really active in free agency. I think they can pick up legitimately 3 guys with big money. It's the most money they've been able to spend since 2019. I mentioned it earlier. If you start seeing restructures where they start moving money out, charging it on the credit card, you're going to start seeing the Packers make a lot of moves. Okay. Again, not a great free agent class, but they could make 2, 3, 4 moves that I really think could make a big difference. The draft is super deep at defensive line. I mentioned I was going to go over this earlier. Daniel Jeremiah, who I think is the best draft analyst, he's got 51 players on the D-line that he has starter grades on. For perspective, there were only 26 last year. So that's the only thing that makes me think that they might go the draft route for that. But again, just to put it bluntly, there is 0 chance that they do not get aggressive this year. If you can't look at the NFC North after last year, you can't look at what the Eagles did, what the Lions have, and say, oh yeah, our team is plenty good enough right now to win. They're just not. So they're going to go big in free agency. I think it's going to be a big free agency for them. My ultimate prediction, they're going to sign Davante Adams, Josh Sweat, and Paulson Adebo. Those are the big names. That's going to do it for today, guys. We got a ton of draft stuff coming up in the coming weeks. My next episode will be the initial guys in the draft that I really like, who we can start watching tape for. I just started diving into players and watching tape. I'm super excited about the first few rounds. It's not a really blue chip draft, but a lot of depth later. In fact, if there's ever a year to trade down, it's this year. If any emergencies happen, any news breaks, we'll do an emergency episode, but got lots of stuff coming. I hope you guys stuck it out to the end. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time. Go Pack, go.